Picture this. You're a kid. It was the 1980s. TV is analog, ninjas are apparently everywhere, video games are awesome. And you just saw a movie called Ghostbusters. Not only was it a kick-ass movie, but you're pretty sure it was something you weren't supposed to see, cause there was a bunch of swear words and grown-up stuff in there with all the dudes shooting lasers at monsters, which only makes it more kick-ass. Then you hear they went and made Ghostbusters into a cartoon. Sounds good to you, so you pour yourself a theoretically grain-based bowl of sugar, plunk yourself in front of the tube, and you see this. What the f*** is this? These aren't the Ghostbusters. What happened to Peter Venkman, Winston Zeddemore, Ray Stantz, Egon Spengler, Janine Melnitz, Louis Tully, Dana Barrett, Zool, Gozer, Walter Peck? I really like Ghostbusters. And why is there a monkey? Now, later on, you saw there was a different cartoon with the real Ghostbusters called, The Real Ghostbusters, and you felt a lot better. But still, what the hell was this other thing? Why were there two sets of Ghostbusters? Well, because
TV is weird.
Our story begins in 1965 with a short-lived comedy series called F Troop. It was an ahead-of-its-time satire of the Western genre, set around a remote U.S. cavalry fort that served as a dumping ground for the Army's least useful soldiers. It was an ensemble show, but the standouts were the comedy team of longtime character actor Forrest Tucker and comedian-slash-voice actor Larry Storch, as a pair of con artists working a side game with the local Indians. They keep the actually small and friendly tribes safe by spreading rumors that they're ferocious and not to be messed with, and in return the natives supply them with authentic Indian goods to sell to gullible tourists back home. Like a lot of high-concept 60s series, F Troop was only a mild success, only lasting for 2 seasons, but its slapstick comedy stylings made it a huge hit with young kids in syndication for years afterwards. So in 1975, kiddie TV mega-producers FILMATION, who were responsible for a ridiculous amount of stuff you probably watched if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, brought the Tucker and Storch comedy team back together for a kids' show about 2 detectives and a gorilla who fought ghosts and other supernatural creatures. They called it The Ghostbusters. The show was low budget, we are talking about FILMATION after all, but it had a certain goofy wit. For example, our trio of heroes are named Spencer, Tracy, and Kong. And Tracy is the gorilla. That sort of thing. Oh, and that's nerd legend Bob Burns in the monkey suit, by the way. But, witty or not, it only ran for 15 episodes and was essentially forgotten by everyone but FILMATION, who were really careful about holding on to their copyrights, a practice that would eventually pay off. Fast forward a decade to 1984, comedian-slash-paranormalist Dan Aykroyd and his friends Ivan Reitman and Harold Ramis had gone into production on a long-gestating movie project about paranormal exterminators, only to hit a legal speed bump. They'd opted to call it Ghostbusters, apparently not realizing the similarly titled TV show had ever existed, and that FILMATION still owned the rights to that name. But FILMATION remembered, and out came the lawyers. Ultimately, the two parties settled out of court. The movie got to call itself Ghostbusters, but FILMATION was allowed to keep the TV rights to the name. You kinda have to wonder if the movie studio didn't let said rights go too easily because they were perhaps not thinking that their mostly adult-targeted movie was going to be big with kids. But either way, FILMATION definitely knew it was, so they went straight ahead into capitalizing on their suddenly valuable title by producing an animated sequel to the original show, in which Spencer and Kong's sons re-team with Tracy to battle a new generation of ghostly supervillains, and thanks to the settlement, they got to call it Ghostbusters, while the official movie license cartoon had to go by The Real Ghostbusters. The downside, of course, is that while FILMATION's Ghostbusters had its moments, and the idea of maintaining continuity with an obscure TV footnote that nobody remembered is kind of nerd cool in and of itself, it couldn't really compete when all was said and done. The Real Ghostbusters, despite existing initially to push the movie's line of tie-in action figures, was one of the unexpected gems of 80s action cartoons, with above-average animation, story work, and a writing staff including J. Michael Straczynski, and heavy doses of horror mythology iconography. And while FILMATION had some pretty successful series in the 80s, their Ghostbusters wasn't one of them. Still, the unbreakable association with the more popular series and movies meant that it's maintained a kind of pop culture infamy ever since. In the early 2000s, not only the entire animated series, but the entire original series all got released in lavish DVD collections, complete with alarmingly detailed number of special features, which you can virtually guarantee no one could have foretold back in '75. Sometimes, you just never know what's gonna last. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.